Welcome back to HotRodGuyGarage. Today, let me get this 289 short block put together. So follow me on through the intro, and I'll be back. So guys, it has been another week since you've seen the last video where we got this block prepped to start assembling it. So we still got a lot of work to do before we finally assemble it, but let me flip around and I'll show you where I'm at. In our last video, we got this block prepped. We poured some oil galleys, we laid back some oil drain holes, we enlarged a few oil drain holes, done some things to make this thing just a little more reliable in a performance application. Get it back from the machine shop. It has been decked. It's 30 over. It was supposed to have been cleaned, but check out the last video on that. And we got new cam bearings. We put Durabond cam bearings in it. It's got brass freeze plugs and new oil galley plugs in it. We have our rods and pistons here. These are a replacement piston for a K-Code 289. As you see, they're a flat top piston instead of the dished factory 2-barrel or 4-barrel 289 pistons. We have a crankshaft that has been turned 10 on the crank, 10 on the rods, undersized. I've also went in here in the background, cleaned out all these oil galley holes with a brass brush and made sure this thing was clean. So in this video, we're going to talk about what we're going to use to assemble this thing and some good practices in assembling a street performance engine. So the big thing here is everything I sourced for this thing is made in USA, with the exception of the pistons themselves. So what we have a new milling pickup tube, we have a high pressure milling oil pump, we have a set of Clevite rod and main bearings, which are also made in USA. We have a set of Speed Pro rings in a Molly version, 30 over right there, also made in USA. We have an AMK bolt set. We have an Engine Tech, what they call a headache kit, which is all your dowels and fuel pump eccentric and all that stuff. We have an ARP oil pump drive shaft. And of course, anytime you're going to assemble an engine fresh like this, where you're going to check this thing with some plastic gauge. You got a plastic gauge assortment right here. That is part number there. I like to personally use STP oil treatment as an assembly lube. This is a very high zinc stuff and a very thick petroleum based product. It does very well. A good quality torque wrench. Some good quality RTV. And of course, a clean notepad and a good pen to write down all your measurements and specs as we go through it. So guys, hopefully today we can get this short block assembled. I'm still waiting on the cam coming from Comp Cams. They had to custom grind the camshaft for this engine to have the sound that he wanted with the drivability. So what we're going to do, we're going to work on checking clearances, bearing clearances. We're going to start checking ring gaps, and we're going to assemble this thing. This can be a little bit different than our budget engine build series because this is not a budget engine. Starting with everything new and fresh is a very expensive endeavor. So we're going to record everything, we're going to get all our specs, and we're going to know it's right in the end. So first step, we're going to start this party off right. Take you a clean towel, wipe these main saddles out. Even though we just cleaned this and we WD-40'd it, these things need to be clean and dry. So your grooved main bearings will always go on the bottom. So groove side in, we're just going to put the mains in this. Like I said, these are our Clevite tri-metal bearing. And the biggest attraction to them, a tri-metal bearing is more forgiving to dirt in an engine, and they generally last longer and are easier on crankshafts. So on a small block forward, your thrust bearing will always go into the center main, and I like to take a little small hammer and just make sure these main bearings are level in the block. I'll take our clean towel again, wipe these bearings off. And then I'll take an air hose and blow this off. Just make sure there's no lint from one of these towels. And after that, we can set the crankshaft in here. And you want to make sure your crankshaft is dry. We do not want to lube this at this point. Since I sprayed this crankshaft down with some WD-40, I done went in here and wiped these journals off once. We'll wipe them off again, hit them with the air hose, just to make sure we don't have no lint. Once you make sure all that stuff's blown off, we need to get our main caps. We're going to install our bearings in it, just like we did our block. So, I just cleaned our main caps once again. The flat side without the oil groove is going to go on the main cap side. Just going to line your tangs right here. And that bearing should roll in and be flush. Just going to repeat this as we go down. And don't forget that your center main is going to be your one with your thrust bearing. On forward, that's number 3 cap. You want to have your thrust bearing. Or we might just knock everything off the table, which we didn't. So, just going to push these bearings down in here. We'll wipe them off with a clean towel and blow them off with the air hose. And then it will be plastic gauge time. It's just good practice. Make sure everything's clean. So alright, after you get all your main bearings in, now we need to break open our plastic gauge set. Like I said, this is an SPGR1 right here, sealed power set. These are going to come with 2 different kinds of plastic gauge in it. And the difference is the clearance ranges. This is 2 to 6/1000ths of an inch, and this is 1 to 3/1000ths of an inch. Generally, you're going to use this 1 to 3/1000ths on a small block Ford. So this plastic gauge is going to come in increments down through here, and what it does, it has a little wax strip inside this. So what I like to do, I'll take a razor blade and I'll cut it between the scales like this right here. We're going to get our wax out. This piece of wax is really easy to lose. You see it right here. It looks like a hair. And generally what I'll do, I'll cut each one of these sections in half so I have enough in one of these kits to do the rods and the main bearings. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to get our plastic gauge right here up on this razor blade. We'll go to the engine. And since it's on a razor blade, you want to make sure all your oil holes and your crank journals are not facing up. You do not want to put this over a journal. You want this plastic gauge in the center of said crank journal, like that right there. And what we're going to do, we're going to place our cap on there. We're going to run our bolts down. So the big thing with this, guys, you do not want to turn this crankshaft once you do this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and put the plastic gauge on all these journals. I want to torque this once, and we're going to check all the clearances at one time. So I'm going to get our other pieces cut and installed there, and I'll be back. Alright, after you get all your caps on and your bolts run down finger tight, these torque to 60 to 70 foot-pounds. I usually try to shoot, when they got a range of torque like that, I'll try to shoot in the middle. These we're going to torque to 65 foot-pounds. And I'll always start at my middle main bearing and work my way out, tightening them evenly as I go. And you just want to sneak up on your torque. You can feel when you turn these bolts when they get close to getting tight. You just want to pull it till it clicks and not no further. Like I said, you want to make sure with your plastic gauge on there that you do not turn this crankshaft whatsoever. But checking all of these at the same time, you want to make sure that you get them all torqued properly. Like that. I'll let it sit for a few seconds. I'll reverse our torque wrench and we'll break all these loose. And we'll run our bolts out and bring our main caps back over to the table, and we can start checking the measurements. And at this point, after you get all your caps off, you can see the wax on your plastic gauge is mashed down. And what I do right here, I'll write down our specs. This is forward from the service manual. This is the recommended specs right here, 0.005 to 0.0025 thousandths. That is what Ford has for a desired spec on these engines. So our plastic gauge is going to have a little scale on it right here. This isn't precision. It gets you an idea of what you got going on. So what you want to do, you want to match these up as close to whatever it is on your scale width wise. So journal 1 here is 0015. So I'm just going to take 0.0015 on number 1, and I'm going to come back here to the second one back, and I'm going to check it. And if your machine shop done a good job on their machining, every one of these should be the same. It should be consistently the same on every single journal. So looks like we're right there at 0015 on number 2. So we're going to move back to number 3. It looks like we're in the same place. 0015. And we'll move back to our next one back. It's going to be the same. And I'm going to check our rear one too. Yep, these are all very, very consistent. So 0015. So we're in the desired range from the Ford factory service manual. They do give a acceptable tolerance too, but to be in the desired range means that we should have main clearances that are as factory. So to clean the plastic gauge off, generally what I do, guys, I'll take a little brake cleaner on a clean towel. That brake cleaner will dissolve that wax and not leave no residue in the crankshaft. It'll wipe right off. So we'll just take that plastic gauge right off that way, and we'll do the bearings the same way where we have witness marks on them from it. So you can see our main bearings have a little transfer from our plastic gauge. Like I said, brake cleaner, guys, you take it and just wipes right on there, wipe that witness right off. It doesn't hurt the bearing, none whatsoever. It dries without a residue. And I will take and blow these off again here momentarily. But it looks like so far everything's going to be in line as far as the main bearing clearance goes. And before we get too wild and do anything here, like putting the crankshaft in for the last time, we need to get a new rear main seal. This is a 2-piece rear main seal block. So what I got is Felpro's rear main seal right here. Read these directions, guys. If you put this seal, you can see it has a cut in this lip right here, or an edge right here. This edge faces towards your bearing on both the top and bottom halves. So what I like to do on a 2-piece rear main seal like this, the factory rope style seal in this thing is going to have a pin. As you can see, I've already took something, and I've ground that pin out of there lightly. That pin drives in through here. Most time you're never going to drive them back out. Most time it's only in the cap side, not in the block side. Some have them in the block and the cap. But I'll take this new rear main seal. I will clean it off brake cleaner. I want to make sure there's no wools on this rear main from when it was packaged. So a lot of people will take and put RTV in this groove right here. What I like to do, I'll take some anaerobic sealant. And if you don't know what anaerobic sealant is, anaerobic sealant only dries when there is no air present. And I will take a little bit of this anaerobic. And a lot of you are probably cringing right now. But I've done this like this for a long time with good results. It don't take a lot of this stuff, and I'll just put a little bit on the raised portion of the lip where it goes in the cap. You want to make sure that cut in that groove, that lip right there, goes towards the side with the oil. I will also take and I will stagger my rear main seal in this cap. I don't necessarily want it flush on each side. I want it staggered. And staggering this rear main will help prevent oil leaks right here. Because no matter if you put RTV here, anaerobic, or whatever, it is hard to seal these two rubber ends back together. So by offsetting them, helps prevent that issue. And on the block side, I'm going to do the same thing. Just a little anaerobic on the outside edge of the seal. I'm going to pay attention. I'm just going to sit it down right here for now. I want to see where my offset is. Right here. And get our offset close. And I'm just going to use our cap to kind of push our rear main down into position. Just make sure that we're squared up and that rear main is installed. So at this point, we're ready to get some assembly lube, get it on these bearings right here, and we'll get the crankshaft set back in this engine. So what I do, I just take some SSTP oil treatment, and I'll put it on our bearings right here. I'll take a little bit and wipe our rear main seal on both sides. You don't want to put this seal in there dry either. I've had good luck with this STP in these situations. You want to wipe both sides of your thrust. What we're doing is just trying to make sure when we start this thing before we prime it, which I always prime my engines, but when it sits here, I want to make sure all this stuff's oiled. A, so it don't rust, and B, if you don't get it primed good, you won't spin a bearing. And if you get everything lubed up, you're ready to put your crankshaft back in. Just gonna get a crank right here, sit it down in there. And then I'm gonna take a flathead screwdriver and make sure our bearings haven't turned or moved. Make sure they're flat against the block right here. And we'll start putting main caps on it here in just a moment. So, I got all the main caps on there except for the one with the rear main seal. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a little of this anaerobic sealant. And I'm going to put it on this main cap right here. Don't take a whole lot of this stuff, just a little bit. And what that's going to do is help seal that oil out of this metal to metal gap. It really don't matter if you put it on up a little bit or not. But what we're going to do, because we got our rear main seal staggered right here, we need to get this rear main started down in that block and started into the cap. Once we get it started like that, then we put our bolts on there and snug them down. And once you get your rear cap on, before I torque these down, these are just run down hand tight. I will take and I'll smack this crank with a dead blow hammer forward and backwards. What that does is help seat that thrust bearing and also help seat our rear main seal. So at this point, ready to start torquing main caps. So just going to do the same 65 foot-pounds we did before. Starting in the center and working out. Then what you want to do after your rear main's installed, you want to make sure that this crankshaft turns easily. You should have a little resistance from the rear main seal, but you want to make sure this thing moves easily. And you want to come back here at the back and make sure you have a little squish out of that anaerobic sealant. So you're going to have a little squish out of your anaerobic sealant. It's good to go ahead and just wipe this off, because this stuff does not harden until there is a lack of oxygen, which is why it works great for like this rubber to metal seal or metal to metal right here where there is no oxygen. It will do well and dry up. And some of you may get concerned if your crank gets a little tighter to turn. This crank is going to be a little tight with this two-piece rear main seal, because that rear main seal clamps in between these caps. So don't be alarmed if your crank's a little hard to turn. That's why we check our oil clearances to make sure that it's not an oil related bearing clearance problem. So it's a little tighter right here. You can loosen this rear main cap up, it frees right back up because the rear main seal squish onto our crankshaft. So we should have a good leak-free seal back here at this point. So the next thing we need to check is the thrust play on this crankshaft. So I'll have to get my dial indicator out. We'll get it set up. We'll check thrust. So what I usually do, I'll use my dial indicator. I got it clamped to the engine stand right here, to the crank plate face. I'll come up here. I'll pry this crankshaft forward as far as it'll go. Okay. I'll come in here. I'll give my gauge a couple of flips. I will make sure it is zeroed. And then we'll come back here and we'll pry this rearward and we'll measure our thrust that way. So looks like we got about 4 thousandths, which factory force spec is 4 to 8 thousandths, so it's right there on the tight side of the spec. So we're in good shape there. Seems like a lot of work, don't it? It absolutely is. But this is all necessary steps to make sure that when you rebuild your engine with all new parts and good quality parts, that when you start this thing up, you're not going to have a failure. So you do your due diligence, make sure you cover your steps as you go, and then you know when you first turn that key that you're going to have good results. So next thing we need to check is going to be our rod bearing clearances. So I got our new rod bearings out here, and I'm going to check these one crank throw at a time. So on our first crank throw, that'd be cylinders 1 and 5. These rods are factory stamped. These are also wrote on with a little marker to identify them. I did have these rods, made sure they were resized and round, made sure we wouldn't have no issues, and also had them weight matched to our old rods and pistons. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this rod and I'm just going to open it up. I'm going to put our bearings in here. And on a small block forward, all of you rod bearings, uppers and lowers, are going to be the same. They're both going to have, especially in these Molly bearings, or Clevite 77 bearings. Same company. They're both going to have holes in them. And what that hole is for, there is a oil hole in this rod right here. You see this? This hole shoots pressurized oil at these wrist pins. So you can't really misalign these, but it's always good practice to make sure as you go, to make sure that your oil hole does line up with that. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pair pistons up and our rods here with our new bearings. We're going to cut us some plastic gauge, lay it on that crankshaft, and go from there. So I'm going to take our piston without any rings. It's also note, this piston needs to go forward. Your bearing here is going to be offset. You can see this taper right here. This is super important. This taper on this rod faces the outside of this journal, because they can't go in here and cut a straight 90 on these. So the rods are tapered to compensate. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take our rod and piston without any rings on it, dry. And I'm just going to push our rod up in there. I put our plastic gauge inside our upper rod cap on this one. So your rod's also going to have that offset. That offset goes towards the crank throw. And I'm going to take and just snug this up. Now I'm going to roll this engine over. I'm going to install the other rod and piston without, like I said, without any rings on it. And we're going to check our oil clearances one crankshaft throw at a time, just like this. But the 302 and 289, they torque between 20 and 22 foot-pounds. So I will set mine to 21 on my torque wrench. I'll go ahead and torque this one rod cap right here. And we can roll this engine over, get the other rod and piston in it, and we'll have a good idea of what our oil clearance is on this first crank throw. And once you get both of them in there and torqued, it's time to remove them. So basically, you're just going to do a lot of taking together and putting together and taking apart and putting together and taking apart. But it's well worth the money, guys. Well worth the time to know what you got. So what happens is, generally, if you put the plastic gauge on the cap, it's going to transfer to the crank. And if you put it on the crank, it's going to transfer to the cap. So let me get these rods out here. We'll measure clearance. And what you're going to end up with, you can see our plastic gauge here, and you see our plastic gauge over here. So what you're going to do, you're just going to line it up. We're going to check our clearance here. Looks like it's 0.15. About 0.15 over here. So, just going to take a little brake cleaner on the towel. Wipe that wax off from our plastic gauge. Then we'll consult our factory Ford specs. And the factory Ford specs are 0008 to 0015 for desirable specs. We are a little on the wide side of the desirable specs, but it's still well within the Ford allowable specs. So we should not have any problem with that kind of rod bearing clearance. So I'm going to put you guys on a bit of a time lapse, get all the rest of these bearing clearances checked, and then I'll be back. Alright, so I got all our bearing clearances checked. I rolled the engine back over. So what I had to do here, I'm going to have to modify the torque on the third throw back. But we're at 15 thousandths on all of them. That's why most of these have a variance in the spec. You can use the spec just a little bit to change the clearance just a touch. So on the third throw back, we had 22. And 22. When I torqued it at 25 foot-pounds, I went back and checked it. We had 15 and 15 like the rest of the throws. So those oil specs are right there, and Ford's desired specs with up to 25 thousandths allowable. So 22 would still been all right at the low torque, but went ahead and brought it up to 25, and that tightens up. That does not work in all cases. Some cases it does. As long as you stay within your allowable specs, you should be good, guys. So for our next thing we're going to do, we are going to check the first and second ring gaps on this engine. Not necessarily because it's going to be a performance style build, and like I said, this is going to be a mild motor. But I want to know if our rings are too wide, if our rings are too narrow. Because if they're too narrow, in situations where he might put some cheap gas in this thing, it might detonate. And if it detonates, it builds up lots of heat in the chamber and in the piston. And what you get at that point is you get rings that could butt together. And when those rings butt together is a very bad thing right here. Because when those rings butt together, you can bust the crown off this piston. You can bust second ring land into the oil groove. I mean, there's lots of bad things that can happen with heat and detonation, especially when a ring gap butts together. So we need to at least check it. So what we got a set of sealed power, which is made by Speed Pro. This is their plasma moly ring set. Plasma moly ring set is a good ring set, good to seal very quickly, and really bites into those cylinders to give you the best possible compression. So what we're going to concentrate on is our second ring groove and our top ring groove. The oil ring grooves aren't as detrimental. Generally they're on the wider side with an aftermarket ring set. So we're going to concentrate on the ones that can hurt stuff. So it's going to be these two right here. So what we're going to need to check the ring gap, Ford spec. And what I've done right here, I've also wrote out a chart for the top and our second ring on each cylinder. The factory Ford OE spec is 10 to 20 thousandths. So what I got here is a 10 and 20 thousandths filler gauge. These are going to be our no-go and no-go gauge. If it falls between here, it's going to be a go. Or if it falls on this one or falls on this one, it'll be a go. But if it's anything above or below, we'll have to figure something else out. So, other than the rings and a set of filler gauges, what you're going to need is one of your pistons. And what we're going to do, we're going to take these pistons, we're going to put these rings individually into the bores. We're going to take this piston to square that ring up in the bore. We're going to push it down to where it's level, and then we will measure ring gaps. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to measure 4 of these at a time. So I'm going to take 4 individual rings for our second ring groove, and I'm going to lay them out. This is bank 1 on a small block Ford, which will be your passenger side. So I've got my pistons in a box over there, and they're numbered. So as I fit these, move these up. I'm just going to get these rings in the bore by hand. As we fit these, and we check them, because we can move these rings if we don't like the gap in one bore to another. But if a machine shop done their job properly, all these ring gaps should be equal. Same with the ring manufacturer. If all the rings were machined properly when they were made, they should all be consistent. So we're going to take this right here. We're going to take our piston. And you can do this several ways. You can go ahead and put your oil rings on here and push this down until the oil ring stops. Or you can do it by hand. I like to push it down to the oil ring groove. And I'm just going to take this until we're flush with the deck all the way around. I'm going to set our piston to the side. And I'm going to come in here and see where our ring's at. So what you're going to have at this point, I'm going to move you guys right here. Your ring gap is right here. So by using our piston to square it up, we're going to be able to go see if we have a go or no go situation. Our 10 thousandths filler gauge passes. Our 20 thousandths filler gauge does not pass. So these will be in an acceptable range. So at this point, I'm going to pull out another filler gauge right here. I'm going to pull out a 16 thousandths, and I'm going to check it and see if it'll pass, and it will not. And I'm just going to go down through our filler gauges until I find what don't pass, or what does pass. But we're going to use that 10 and 20 thousandths to check our gap. So a 16's too tight and a 12's too loose. So I'm going to assume we're probably going to be around 14 thousandths. So I'm going to take a 15 and check it. And our 15 is pretty snug. So what I'm going to do, we're just going to wash, rinse, and repeat as we go down. Like I said, this is good practice. You can surely just throw the rings in it. But I left my filler gauge out from the other cylinder. And I'm just going to do this to check consistency. Our same filler gauge is good and snug in cylinder 2. We'll do the same thing with cylinder 3. Just going to bring it down here till our oil runs flush. Make sure our end gaps are level. That's the big important thing here. I'm going to check it. And our filler gauge is good and snug. And I'm just going to repeat this, like I said, as we go. We'll repeat this for both rings. And that filler gauge is good and snug. So, at least we know, at least at this point, we have a consistency between the rings and the machine work that was done to the block. And I'm going to repeat this process with our top rings as we go. And when I take these rings off, guys, I will stack them in order. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because the next thing we do before we go to the other side, I'm going to put these rings on our pistons. So you just repeat the process I showed you a while ago. I'm going to orientate that ring gap into the same position I had it on the other, just for consistency purposes. But like I said, this is something you should definitely check as you go. I'm just going to go ahead and push all these down level. There we go. Set our piston to the side. And I've still got our same filler gauge out. This is a 17 thousandths filler gauge. I said 15 earlier, guys, and I meant to say 17 thousandths. All you second ring gaps were at 17 thousandths. All our top ring gaps are at 17 thousandths. They got a good snug. With a filler gauge, you don't want it tight. You want to be able to pass that thing through there where it's kind of snug, but it has just a little bit of drag on that ring. So we're at 17 thousandths on all these also. So at this point, I've got our oil expander rings and our scraper rings opened up also. But I've got 1 through 4 on our second ring groove and 1 through 4 on our top ring groove that we measured and verified right here. When you buy a performance set of piston rings, such as these Seal Power Plasma Mollies, they're going to come with a ring gap recommended chart. What I have wrote down is the Ford specs. What they recommend for a mild performance engine using a 4-inch bore, ours is 4030, is between 16 and 18 thousandths. So for the 30 over right here, you want to add per inch of bore is 0.004 thousandths per inch of bore. An important thing to note, on a brand new engine like this with a fresh bore and new rings, this ring gap is going to open up slightly. So we will fall pretty much dead in what Seal Power recommends for their specs. But they're going to give you some nice set of instructions right here that I suggest you pull out and read. And also they're going to send a chart like this that gives you ideal end gap orientations along with honing finishes for ring seating and extended life. So, like I said, what we're going to do, we're going to start out by getting our oil rings onto our pistons. And I'm not going to show you all of them, guys. I'm going to show you one and I'm going to do the rest of them. But generally what I do, I will just spiral all our rings on. They do sell ring expanders. I do not have one, never used one. I've never had no issue doing it this way. But what you're going to do, you're going to take one of your oil expander rails right here. Or a scraper rail right here. I got daisy hair on our piston. But what I do, we have one gap right here. We're going to take our second one. Okay, this one's here. I'm going to rotate this one 180 degrees from our original one. Like I said, just going to spiral it on here. And when you get done, you want to be able to squeeze these rings. On our second ring groove, we want to check our ring and see if it says anything from top, or if it has a top or a dot, the dot goes up. This one has top. And the reason why it has that, and I know it's going to be hard to see on camera, but this ring has a taper. And that taper helps this piston ring seal on the inside bore of this piston. So we got a top right here. I'm going to note where our oil scraper ring's at. I'm going to put this ring gap 180 degrees from that one. And I'm going to spiral these a little bit different. I'm going to be a little more gentle because these rings are fragile. And I'm also going to hold it out as I go down to keep from scraping our piston face. Right there. So, our top piston ring. This is our plasma moly coated faced ring right here. This one has a dot. We're going to look at it at the profile. And that dot is also going to go up. I'm going to stagger this ring 180 degrees from the other one. Like I said, you just want to be gentle and you spiral these rings on. And you want to make sure once you get them on that these rings move freely and that you can squeeze them freely. So I'm going to get these 4 pistons and rings set up. We're going to go to the other side, we'll check them, and I'll check back in with you guys with the specs on the other side. And then I'll show you what to do if your ring gap is too tight. Alright, so say that your piston ring gap is too tight. I went through on 289, all the rings and all the bores fell right in the same spec. They were all about 17 thousandths. But if you're building a nitrous motor, a turbo motor, and you need that wider ring gap, you're going to use something like this Jegs piston ring filer right here. I've had this thing for many years. I've not used it a whole lot because generally I mess with old wore out junk that has wore out bores, and generally rings are already pretty widely gapped. But in the case of like turbo LS stuff or turbocharged engines, these things come in handy. And this has a diamond impregnated wheel, so it's got a real long life. It has a rib here that you can clamp into a bench vise, and this was a manual version. You can turn it with your hand, or you can take this out and use a 1/2 inch drive drill to spin this. But if you have a ring gap that is too tight and you need to open it up, you can take one of these piston ring filers, and it has 2 stops up here so that you can squeeze this ring together up against this. And what you're going to do, you're just going to spin this a few rounds, and you can go back and check. Put this piston ring back in your bore. Check your ring gap. If it's still too narrow, you're going to put it back in here and you're going to file it. You're just going to work it until you get the ring gap that you desire. These save a lot of time and they're very handy to use. But you can also use a very fine flat file and do these by hand if you wish. But in a time-saving scenario, or if you want to make sure these are completely square, this right here is the way to do it. I'm not going to grind on these rings any because they're perfect where they're at. But I just wanted to show you guys that there are products out here to make your life a little easier. And this thing wasn't very high when I bought it. Like I said, I've had it for multiple years. I've not checked prices lately, but these will literally last forever. So just to show you guys, I didn't figure if I didn't show you exactly how this worked, it wouldn't help. I found no piston ring around here. This is not out of the 289. But what you're going to do, you're just going to take this thing and you're just going to apply some light pressure. And you're going to take and just spin this a few rounds like this. And what that does, like I said, it files in these rings squarely to make sure that you don't have any wildly inconsistent gaps. So as you can see, those butt up flush right here. They sit completely against each other. So these things are real worth money. And alright, after you get all your piston rings on the pistons, now we're getting ready to put them in. I put these in one bank at a time. So we're going to do 1 through 4 and then we'll do 5 through 8. For my piston rings, a lot of you asked, I always use this kind of red tinted mystery lube on my piston rings. Generally what I do, I will fill a small cup up like this. I usually keep a little glass baby food jar. I'll fill it up about half the amount I need with regular 10W30 engine oil, a conventional engine oil. I will add 50% of just plain Marvel mystery oil. And then I'll add about 10% of STP oil treatment to kind of thicken it up a little bit until I get a consistency that runs off like normal engine oil, because the Marvel mystery oil does thin it out a little bit. I generally do this because I've had good results and I've not had any ring seating issues doing it this way. A lot of people use transmission fluid. I've used transmission fluid with no issues. About 10 years ago I started using this combination and it works really well. So that's what I'm going to use to lube my piston rings and my piston pins before we put them in the bores. I will use our regular STP on our rod bearings, and for our piston ring compressor we are going to use the Summit tapered ring compressor this time right here. This is a USA made piece. These are very nice. If you're curious, this one covers a 4-inch through a 4090 bore right here. And this right here is the part number. It is SME-90A4000. So what I'm going to do when I start out, I usually keep a little syringe like this here at the shop. This is just a baby medicine dropper syringe. And I'll shoot a little bit of this on our piston pins. Get it in there, and I'll kind of work these pins back and forth. I'll come in here on the piston side. I'll put a little bit in here, work it back and forth. Make sure that's really in there. And then generally I just dunk my pistons. I didn't have a clean cup, so I used one of these disposable paint cups. It's really thin. But you can also do the same with your piston rings. Just come in here, squirt these things down good. Kind of spin them around. If you squeeze them, you can keep them in the same orientation they were without messing with your ring gaps. And then I'll let that sit there a few minutes. Before I put this into the ring compressor, I will lube our skirts, and I'll put a little bit on one of these blue towels that's clean, and then I'll wipe down the board also, make sure it's well lubed. But a tip that's going to help a lot of you guys out as you do these. Okay, this is cylinder 1. I'm going to set a rod cap to the side. I cut a couple of small pieces of fuel line, and that will help this rod get on that crankshaft without the worries of the rod bolts nicking a journal, causing a high spot that can grab your bearing and spin it. So I went ahead and wiped down our bore. I lubed our crank journal down here. We got our tapered piston ring compressor right here. I'm just gonna set our piston on our deck, and I'm gonna take this down, and I'm just going to snug lightly down on this compressor. I want it to be able to still move on the piston. That's going to be important. So I got it snugged down lightly. I want to get a hammer. And one other thing you can use is a piston hammer like this right here. I usually use an old wooden hammer, use the handle on it. But Summit Racing has this nice little hammer right here. Part number on it is SUM SL32. And what this does, it just makes it a little easier. Gives you a little more leverage. But like I tell you guys, you don't have to have fancy tools. You can use just a cheap piston ring compressor if that's what you got. So you're just going to take your new piston rings. Like I said, I usually just use my old wooden hammer. I find it easier. It's what I've worked with all these years to just use it. So I want to make sure our piston ring compressor is still snug. I'm just going to take my hammer, lightly tap around the top, and this piston should just slide right in. So what you're looking for, guys, you're just looking to get that piston into that bore. Your piston ring compressor pops off. Let me pull you guys back here. I want to show you the rubber pieces of hose. You can see them down there on that journal. And what those are going to do, like I said, it just helps guide your rod down on that crank throw. That way you don't have any risk of nicking those journals. So let's take that wooden hammer. We'll tap it down till it stops. And at this point, we've got a rod cap. Always remember that taper on that rod cap faces the crank throw. The taper always faces out. So I'm just going to take my rod bolts, rod nuts right here. I'm going to run them up by hand. And since we're going to have to rotate this motor, I'm not going to torque them quite yet, but what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take a ratchet and I'm going to make sure this rod is good and snug. Not tight, snug. You got to remember, these only torque to like 22 foot-pounds. 22 to 25 foot-pounds. What I'm going to do is make sure that bearing is sitting against each other. That way the tabs don't allow it to rotate when we turn this engine over for our next rod and piston. And once I get all 4 pistons on this bank, I will go in there and torque all 4 of these rod bolts. That's one thing I've not shown you in the videos. When I torque a bolt, I'll take a paint marker, I'll mark it. That way I know that it is torqued. So when I get to that point, guys, I'll show you. I think you kind of get the gist of what's going on as far as putting pistons in here. That's about as many helpful tips of doing this as I can give you. If the piston does not go in the bore, do not fight it. Figure out why. With these tapered piston ring compressors, they take a lot of the risk out of getting a ring that jumps out between. That's why you want to make sure this stays flush with the deck. Those oil scraper rings are what tends to jump out. And if they get folded up around the piston skirt, it will make your engine very tight. So what I like to do, I'll rotate this. When I rotate this, each piston I put in, I'll feel the difference. And we'll get into some rotational specs that the factory puts out on what it should take to rotate this engine over when it is new and fresh. So got all our rod bolts torqued on the first 4 cylinders. As you can see, I'd marked the mains too and the rods when I torque them. This orange paint will stay on here literally forever, and if it gets too hot, it actually turns yellow. Just one of these mighty markers. You can get these anywhere. They're like an enamel paint pen. Won't cause any issues. Like I said, it don't come off. I've done them this way for years. But generally, after I get everything torqued, I'll rotate this and make sure I can hear our piston rings scuff along the cylinders is normal, and that the rotation of the assembly is smooth. So now we just gotta get the other 4 rods and pistons in it, and basically a rotating assembly will be assembled at that point. So I'm not gonna bore you with that, guys. Literally in about 1, 2, and just like that, all our rods and pistons are torqued. So when you get this together, you want to be able to turn this smoothly with a short ratchet. You want to be able to hear the piston rings scuff on the cylinders. That's how they break in. Those piston rings have friction against those cylinder walls, and as they go up and down, they wear together and creates a good seal. So I just like to spin it over a few times at this point just to make sure everything feels smooth. We've done our due diligence to check all our specs and clearances, and everything feels good. So there's only one other thing to check at this point with the rotating assembly, and that is going to be the piston to deck height. So we're going to roll our engine over right here. I'm going to flip it over, and then I am going to bring cylinder number 1 all the way to top dead center. And you're going to have to watch it here. You can tell when this piston stops. It'll get up here for a second, and it'll kind of rock and start to go back down. So you want to get that piston as purely on top dead center as you can. That right there is cylinder 1 on top dead center. Now I'm going to go grab a micrometer. We're going to measure the piston to the top of the deck right here and see what our spec is. And for this, I'm just going to take a digital micrometer, make sure it is zeroed out. And I'm going to take and use this end and measure to our deck, to our piston, a couple of spots just to make sure. We're about 18 thousandths from the piston to the top of the deck. So at this point, I'm going to do this with the other corners. I'm going to record these measurements because they will be handy when we're going to do the compression math on this engine, so we know what kind of fuel he's going to have to run. That one's about 18 thousandths and 18 thousandths. We're going to check our rear ones, and I'm only going to check the corners in this to make sure that they've done a good job when they deck this block and make sure the deck's square. $18 thousandths. About 18 thousandths. That's 18. And 18. So we got a block that is good and square as far as the rods and pistons go. So we have about 18 thousandths from the top of the piston to the deck surface, and that is real good with an aftermarket replacement piston like these. Because most aftermarket replacement pistons, guys, if you don't deck the block to compensate for the piston compression height difference, when you buy a piston, you need to check the compression heights versus the factory compression height of the piston. That is why we had this block decked. kind of took a theoretical measurement off that I thought was right, is what I told him to take, and it looks like we fell right back into a factory style spec. Most factory Ford pistons are anywhere from 16 to 24 thousandths below deck when they are new. So this one falling right at the 17 to 18 thousandths mark puts us right at what this engine should have been when it was new. So what I'm hoping for is we're going to probably, depending on how much is going to have to come off the heads, I'm hoping this engine will come out somewhere around 9-to-1 compression, like real compression, not an advertised. Most of the time you get an advertised compression, they vary somewhere between, a half a point over what's advertised, either high or low, depending on how the block is machined or decked. So at this point, I went ahead and re-recorded my measurements on another piece of paper and put it in his paperwork. That way he has it for later if he has any questions with the part numbers and all the specs. Kind of done it a little nicer and neater than my version over here. But this right here, guys, just make sure, it just really just verifies that you've done the work and you've done your own due diligence. And if you have any questions, you can also go back and reference your work. So hopefully by our next video, I will have the camshaft and comp. Like I said, they must be forging this thing in a factory here, machining it somewhere far, far away instead of just 2 states over from me, because it has been over a month at this point since I ordered it. And we're at the point where we need the camshaft where we can finish getting the short block assembled. So that's it, guys. I think that's where I'm going to leave this video off. So if you haven't yet, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends. If you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button because it does help the channel to grow. It helps me bring you more videos like this. If you are a subscriber, I greatly appreciate you guys, and I look forward to everybody's comments down below. So until next video, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.